Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, January 16th, 2025, with the legendary author, journalist, sports TV reporter, Jerry Izenberg. Jerry will be here to discuss his brand new book from last year, Larry Doby in Black and White, um, the story of a baseball pioneer. Here is the cover. We'll speak to Jerry about this. Next week, we'll have Eric Ray. Eric has written some books about fans' experiences at baseball games. He wrote two books concerning them. It'll be mostly about the Giants, but of other well-known fans, not fans, people who've experienced great things at non-Giant things. A couple of people had asked me about donations to our group. If anybody wants to make a donation and doesn't know where to send it, just email me and we'll provide you with that information. But it is just a Jerry has been on the his spare time, and every time I speak to Jerry or talk and introduce him, I have to say that I met Jerry in quotes on Channel 5 with Sports Extra every Sunday night. Back then, you didn't get the football game, highlights, and Jerry was usually at Giant Stadium talking to Lawrence Taylor or whoever it might be. But he is a legendary figure in New York, New Jersey, and the tri-state area. He's just a legendary figure everywhere across this country. So, without any further ado, let's all welcome back Jerry Izenberg. Jerry,
Well,
welcome, welcome.
thank you very much. I always enjoy these experiences. Those of you who remember any of the other BS that I spread around and other things, my father, he was a minor league ball player, never got above Class B, which they had in those days, and but his dream was to play in the Polo Grounds, and he hammered it into me so much that when I finally got to the Polo Grounds, I was about 12 years old. We went over, we took a bus to New York, wouldn't take long, got on the subway. Now, you remember the subway underground as you start to come up to the Giant Stadium, it would, the heavy, long stairs, and it appears that the stadium appears to you, I'm sorry, in sections as you're coming up the steps. And I expected to hear, listen to my father, I expect to hear organ music or opera as we're walking up the stairs, because that to him was actually sitting in the Holy Grail. And one day, I guess it was not the last year, but the next to last year of Carl Hubble. And my dad says, "What are you doing Saturday?" Well, I want to be a second baseman like him. I was horrible, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I said, "I'm playing ball." That's what he said. "You're not playing ball. You're wasting your time anyway. Come with me Saturday." I said, "I don't want to go. I want to play." He said, "It's not a democracy. You have no votes." So we get on a bus. We go over to the Polo Grounds, and it's sold out. Giants, Dodgers. Well, as everybody on the other end of this screen knows, there were more Dodger fans, particularly near the end, than there were Giant fans until the metamorphosis, because they only had 32,000 seats. So they came over to the Polo Grounds. It was so simple. So I get up, it's sold out. So my father says, "I don't care, give me two standing room." So, okay, the guy gets us the tickets. Now we're walking up the ramp where we're going to stand. We can't see the field yet. And then all of a sudden, he says, "This is fine right here." I said, "I can't see anything but the pitcher's mound." And he said, "That's all you're supposed to see today." Hubble was pitching, and it might have been, I think it was his last game against the Dodgers. For 4 innings, he pitched with his head, with his brain, and a little bit with his arm. There wasn't much left. And then all of a sudden, bang, boom, crash. 5 runs are in, and Melot is walking to the pitcher's mound to get the ball and get him out into a much safer place. And I saw something then. It was a reason back then. It isn't anymore. It was a reason I really loved baseball. He takes the ball. I know that more than half the people in the stadium are Dodger fans. Hubble is walking off. The entire stadium stands up and gives him an ovation. Which I mean, with all there was a bit of hatred in the rivalry. Dick Bartell and Van Lingle fought underneath the stands, had a fist fight at Ebbets Field. So it wasn't all kisses and love, but they knew what this guy could do. They knew what he did. And the Dodgers, there were three kinds of fans in New York in those days. You had the stockbrokers who all rooted for two things. I don't mean the stockbrokers, the wealthy people. They rooted for the stock market and they rooted for General Motors and anything else that they possibly could lose, they weren't going to root for that team. Dodger fans were insane. Giant fans, of which my father was a typical example all those years, no pennant since the 30s, and then Bobby Thompson comes along. And Giant fans to me were the spike shoe version of biblical Jobs. They sat there, well, we lost today, but maybe tomorrow we can win. Maybe tomorrow. They kept coming back. Now, at the very end, that was the complaint that there weren't enough of them weren't there because the Dodgers were leaving too. But to me, they had amazing patience and they understood the game and they always understood the reasons for. Anyway, let's talk about the Giant locker room. The Giants integrated with Hank Thompson and Monte Irvin. Hank, I just knew casually. Monte Irvin, I had my three best friends in the world at one point, outside of my wife and kids, were Monte Irvin, in no order, Monte Irvin, Larry Doby, who I wrote the book about, and Muhammad Ali, because these were really friends. I could count on them for anything when I needed them. Okay, so now the road crew was a guy, he was very direct. We all know that. And he had a lot about him that you could like, and he had enough about him that you didn't like. So it didn't make any difference. He's standing in the locker room. He could do something every street kid in Newark, New Jersey could do with Jerry Izenberg. I can't put these two fingers in my mouth and whistle. I can't do it. But Leo could do it. So there's, it's a pregame, the guys are milling about. He whistles, everybody stops because they know he wants to say something. He said, listen, you see these two guys with me? Let me tell you. The guy on the left plays 5 positions. His name is Hank Thompson. The guy on the right, Monte Irvin, may one day be the most essential base hitter on this team because he's just that good. Now, if you notice, they have a different color than you do. So I'm drawing your attention. I don't know if you got good vision, you must see it already. Because if you don't like that and you don't want to play them, what you can do is go screw yourself because they're here and I'm going to win a pennant with them. And everybody laughed. When Doby walked into the Cleveland locker room, I got to remember, Cleveland, a lot of people may not remember, was a segregated city at that time. Separate schools, separate hospitals, and a amusement park that blacks not dare set foot in at that time.
Wow.
Okay, in comes Vec Vec left him at the entrance. Vec turned him over to the playing manager, Boudreaux. Boudreaux didn't want him. Vec had to have him. I mean, the way he negotiated for him was incredible. He said, look, you to the Newark Eagles. Now, I'll tell you something. Branch Rickey gets credit for being the great father of all black players. Maybe so. But on the other hand, Jackie Robinson, Don Newcomb, a guy who later came from Memphis, and Fancy Dan Bankhead, who was his first roommate. You know how much he paid the Negro League owners for those guys? Nothing. You know how they found out? They were signed in a uniform and they were sent to Nashville where they played with the Dodgers. So he stole them. So when Vec came in to see Mrs. Manley, see, Abe Manley was He owned the team, really. He didn't want to manage it. He didn't want to um, second guess the managers. All he wanted to do was go to out of the way parks and look for black guys who played semi-pro. His dream was always, to send them to whoever the manager was, but he would never tell them till they showed up. So Doby finally gets signed, and he treated Mrs. Manley pretty well. He signed him for $10,000, and she said, if he were white, he'd be in those days, he'd be a $50,000 deal. So Beck said, I can't bring two blacks into Cleveland. I mean, I wish I could, but I can't. But I'll tell you this, um, I'll give you an extra 5,000 if he stays past the cutoff day in spring training. Well, of course, he stayed a lot longer than that. Anyway, he gets into the locker room, and the manager's going to introduce him. But see, he didn't do what Leo did. First of all, we start off with Branch Rickey. He just announced a year in advance he's going to Montreal and he's going to be here next year. Everybody knew it. With Leo, he told me, you don't like it, you can get the hell out of this dressing room. Boudreaux, who didn't want him, said, well, everybody get in your lockers and Larry, go introduce yourself. 5 guys shook his hand. Now, if you take the other 20 guys on the roster, the coaches, the whatever, 5 guys shook his hand. 2 guys turned and faced the wall and wouldn't look at him. He was in Chicago on the road. He didn't have a locker yet. They hadn't added him to the list that goes to the clubhouse people. So he went into the men's room, he changed. He looked in the mirror and he said, I don't give a damn what they say. I'm here and I'm playing. He walked through the empty locker room because they're outside warming up. As he's walking up the tunnel, he hears a familiar sound, which is balls hitting gloves. They're throwing balls. They're warming up back. He gets onto the edge of the field. Nobody will throw him the ball. And he's standing there, and suddenly somebody elbows him in the ribs. Well, Larry, up go the fist. He's ready to fight. It's Joe Gordon, who became his best friend in life. And Joe is the first guy to shake his hand. And he laughs. And when he sees the fist, he says, hey, rookie, are you going to profile in your brand new uniform now and we'll take pictures? Or you want to go out and warm up? And for all the time, it was almost 13 years, that they were both on the Indians, they warmed up with nobody else but each other. It was fascinating. So let's get back to Irvin. Irvin and Doby were lifelong friends. They were lifelong friends, and I wouldn't say I knew them. I would say I probably knew Doby about 10 years after I started writing about him when I was in the business, but I knew Monte before that. Well, Monte in Patterson, New Jersey, where Doby went, there was a black baseball team in the summers. They were called the Smart Set. They were sponsored by a social club called the Smart Set. Irvin is playing for that team. And now they're looking at kids who are local, and Doby's the greatest athlete, 4 sports, 3 all states, in the history of Patterson Eastside High School. So Irvin knows a little bit about him. Meanwhile, the first baseman on that Newark Eagles team was named Lenny. He has a girlfriend in Patterson. He says to Doby, hey, Doby, take a ride with me. I hate the long trip. And he said, I'll go. But if the high school is playing ball, drop me at the field. I'll watch the game. You go with a girlfriend. You come back and pick me up. He goes there. Larry Doby was a skinny kid with big feet, so they knew he was going to grow into them. He hits a ball out of Hinchcliffe Stadium into the Great Falls, which are a tourist attraction. I mean, it was Irvin couldn't believe it. He gets home. He calls up Abe Manley, who owns the team, he says, Mr. Manley, you got to get up there and see this kid. He said, I'm way ahead of you. He's been recommended to me by a black umpire. I'm going up there tomorrow. And then, of course, they sign him. They sign him for they want to give him $100 a month. Anyway, they're so close. He joins as a sophomore in high school. He joins Irvin. He didn't know him at the time with the smart set. And they were, I mean, when they used to, there was a all white semi-pro team in Patterson called the Chevrolet Red Sox. And when they played the smart set, you know, that was the day of semi-pro. When they passed the hat, they made a lot of money. Standing room only. And the crowd totally integrated. So now Doby is the second baseman in the summer, and Irvin is the shortstop. Well, Manley hears about Irvin. This is when Larry's still a kid in high school, and he signs him, but he doesn't tell the manager. The manager is a guy named Willie Wells, and some of you may remember that name. One of the greatest black shortstops in history who never got into organized baseball. So he's managing the team. And Irvin comes in and he sees Irvin with a uniform. He says, smart. So he said, who the hell is this guy? Walks up to him and says, what are you doing here? He said, well, Mr. Manley signed me last night. Okay. Where do you play? He said, and this is how Irvin became an outfielder. He says, well, I'm really a shortstop. And Bismack and Willie Wells looked at him and he said, you see all that green grass out there? I'm the only shortstop on this team. Go find a position out there. And that's how he became an outfielder. And the irony is Doby and Monte were well known in Passaic County as the double play combination of this team, of this semi-pro team. And both of them wound up in the majors as outfielders, and very good ones. Their friendship was tremendous. So now when Doby's going to get signed by the Eagles, they're up there and they're going to offer him $100 a month or whatever. But the very interesting thing about it was his mother had other ideas. It started as the Eagles interviewing Mrs. Manley because she was too young, he couldn't sign. It was Mrs. Manley, like the white mother of two overprivileged kids she wants to send to summer camp, interviewing the camp director. He said, well, I've got conditions. I don't care about the money. He said, number one, you guys are men, and you're playing a man's game. And after the game, you go out and do what men do. I don't want my little boy doing that. So either if he plays in Newark and it's a night game, he stays at your house. Later on this summer, when he goes on the road, Mr. Manley, you're going to have to room with him. Well, Mr. Manley had other ideas how he would spend his spare time because Mrs. Manley had some of the same ideas, and that's a story for another day. But he didn't like that, but he wanted the kid. He really wanted him. Okay, so now he shows up. But first of all, Mrs. Doby, she went back to her maiden name, whatever it was. She says, what about basketball? And Abe Manley says, well, Mr. Manley, Mr. Doby, we don't play basketball. No, she said, but he does. And he's got a scholarship from Claire B at LIU, full ride scholarship. And I don't want him to become Jim Thorpe and lose his amateur status because he took some money from you. Abe said, don't worry about it. He turns to Larry and he says, son, forget who you are. You are now Larry Walker from Crenshaw High School in Los Angeles, California. And you will be that until you turn 18 when you're playing with us. Well, what made it so interesting was, you remember, we know now they merged all the black statistics, you know, with the major league statistics, which was the right thing to do. But remember, there was no Larry Doby that first year. There was a guy named Larry Walker who was him. And I'm still wondering whether they took his first year statistics, they were great, and put him with the other Eagle statistics when he was Larry Doby. It's an interesting question. He might actually have hit higher than he did after the major. Well, anyway, Larry and he were very close. They stayed close all the time. He was always in Larry's house. And Larry Jr. remembers him as Uncle, Uncle Monty. And the, there was a great thing about about him anyway. Doby and he stayed friends long afterwards, after they stopped playing. Yogi was the third wheel in this little wheelbarrow. Their wives decided, well, they're home now. So she made up honey-do list. Honey, do this today. Honey, do that today. Honey, make sure you fix the kitchen lights. Do this, do that. They all three got those lists. They all then met, went over to the American Legion in Montclair, New Jersey, tore up the list, and turned on the ball game. And that's the way they avoided their responsibility, and they had a hell of a time. And they stayed close until the very end. There was, Monty said to me, you don't realize one thing about black baseball. They don't see us. You do. You go to the game, which I did. I was many times when the Eagles played, I was the only white kid in short pants playing hooky in the stands watching them. I thought the Newark Bears were at home. They weren't on the road, but these guys, to me, were heroes because they had Newark on here. Pardon me. So anyway, their closeness continued. There was just, Monty said to me, he said, Larry Doby had the greatest pure swing I ever saw with the possibility of Ted Williams. Now, speaking of Ted Williams, Monty didn't get into the Hall of Fame. Monty got in because he was, well, actually, it started like this. Monty and Larry went to lunch with the guy that was going to be the first president of the Montreal Expos. He was McLean, I think. I don't remember the name. Somebody, I know you guys remember the name. Anyway, they went out to lunch it was, and he said, I got two jobs for blacks. There were very few blacks in the league. He said, I got one as the executive assistant to the commissioner of baseball, and the other one as a batting coach. And Monty said, I think I'd like to be an executive. I'd like to try. Larry said, fine with me, because I want to be a manager. And the path to being a manager is to be a coach. You got to learn things that I still haven't learned. So that's the way they went. And there was, Monty spent his life praising Doby, and Doby remember, we were three friends. I knew Monty for probably maybe 50 years. I knew Doby for about 35. We did a lot of things together. And I appreciated these guys because, well, I want to get back to, I'm jumping around, I know. I want to go back to Ted Williams. So Monty's a rookie. Larry's a rookie playing second base, and then they move him to the outfield. In the old days, as you all know, I'm sure, that you could throw your glove on the outfield grass, and then you go out and pick it up when you got to go in the field. So Larry bends over. He's in Boston. He bends over to pick up the glove. Somebody swats him in the ass. He turns around. It's Ted Williams. He said, I've been watching you, kid. Keep your head up. You're going to be one of the best we ever had. Don't let him wear you down. And believe me, whatever Jackie Robinson went through, and it was pretty bad, it pales in comparison with what Monty went through. Monty he hit 157 his first year, but he only came to bat 20 some odd 30 times. He only played in the field an inning at a time. He was a pinch runner, a pinch hitter, and he started one game. So he really had no shot at all to make it seemed. And it was fine with most of the guys on the team. Although as they realized the following year I made a lot of money in bars. What black man hit the first home run in the World Series? Everybody said Jackie, and I collected the money because I knew it was Larry. Within 1 year, Larry was on the verge of being a superstar. And as a result of that, I thought he was a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. In those days, I don't vote anymore. I don't want to vote. I think it's a fraud that you don't see enough players and you still have a vote. I watch baseball like everybody else, but I don't watch it the same way and in the same volume that I would when I was younger. I think my vote should not count, and I don't vote. But anyway, Monty got in at age 78. I'd have arguments when we were able to vote as writers, and guys would say to me, "Jerry, you don't understand. He just doesn't have the numbers." Well, he had pretty good numbers. He won the batting title twice. He won the runs batted in title twice, and he 1 year Mantle and he were all stars on the same team. They put Mantle in left and they put Larry in center. So it's pretty deserving. But anyway, the fact was, I'd argue with him and I'd say, "Listen, let me tell you something, because I know the real story. I'll give you Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Ty Cobb, and I'll just take Larry. And you tell me which one of their wives and children had to contend with telephone death threats every night the first years of their career, and tell me what they would have hit if that happened." He hit pretty good, but he was not a 330, 340 hitter. But it was interesting to me. And my one fault with baseball writers at one point in my career, they all needed briefcases, big, thick legal brief. That's how they carried the decimal points all around, because that's how they judged everybody, on decimal points. If you got a great team leader, he's contributing toward the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying Doby, but I'm just saying there are a lot of other factors. And there are a lot of factors that I think should keep you out of the Hall, but that's another conversation if I'm ever invited back. So I will say this about that. I wrote columns every year. Once the Veterans Committee got control, I wrote columns saying he should be in. Nobody even nominated. Well, yeah, guys did nominate, but he never got their votes. So he said to me, "Jerry, I'm very pleased that I'm honored that you think I belong, but I don't want you embarrassing yourself anymore. Do not write any more columns saying I should be in the Hall of Fame." I said, "Fine, Larry." And then I said, "Okay, I'm going to write one more that I'll never forget." So I wrote one and I sent a copy of it to every member of the Veterans Committee. And it opened like this: "Why am I not surprised that at age 77 or whatever, before he got in, why am I not surprised that he's not in the Hall of Fame? Because so many of you sons of bitches didn't want him to even get one at bat when it started." I photocopied the columns. I mailed them to every member of the committee. I got one answer. It was a beauty. It started out, "Dear asshole." And then next it said, "What is wrong with you? Monty and Yogi and I are trying desperately to get him in. So get off your fat ass, get off the couch and get us some votes." And it was signed Ted Williams. Now, Doby used to like to credit me with it, but I really think Williams had a lot more to do with it than I did. But he gets in, and Williams, if you remember, and some of you may remember this, when Ted Williams was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he spoke specifically about the black players who would never get a chance and never get in the Hall of Fame. So he was the real motivator. Monty was like a quiet puller of strings. Yogi said, "Whatever they say, I say," and in his style. And Ted was a shaker and mover in this. Okay, so now he gets in, And he gets, now it's the day before Larry's induction. Larry and I were really close. No, let me go back one more day, 2 days before the induction. I said, I'm up there, and he's up there, and his family's up there. And I said, well, is he going to bring any memories back to you when you walk in that hall again? He said, what do you mean again? I've never been in that building. I didn't see any reason to go. I wasn't going to get in. And I said, well, I got a surprise for you. Don't make any dinner plans tonight. I called up Jeff Adelson, who ran the Hall of Fame building. And I said, Jeff, what time do you close tonight? And he said, well, we're going to close about 8 o'clock. I said, open it for me at 9. And he said, who the hell are you that I should open a building for you at 9 o'clock? Because I'm bringing Larry, and he's never been in the building. Okay. He says, you got it. So the two wives who knew each other very well sat in the lobby together. We went through the buildings. It was like living in a ghost story. The lights were on. Nobody was in the museum except the janitor, the two of us, and our wives back in the lobby. As we walked through the hall, we could hear our footsteps. And we're walking past cases featuring people who are dead, the Hannes Wagner's glove, all kind. It was really eerie. Then we get to the Cleveland Indians. And he looks at Boudreaux's thing and he said, I see him, I'm upset, but I'm not going to make a comment. And then he took his finger and went down the wall to the end of where Joe Gordon was sitting in the front row. He said, that's the man. Joe, when he couldn't get anything to eat, he was in Jim Crow State, Arizona, spring training. And they would have to go across the state because they were in Tucson, and the Pro Bowl teams were in Scottsdale and Mesa and Phoenix. They're all on the other side of the state. So they get up early in the morning, they ride the bus, they do a workout in the morning, then they play the game. Then they get it back in the bus. Well, they hadn't eaten. So now there was a hamburger joint about halfway between the two cities. They stopped there, and the first time that Larry was at spring training, they stopped there. He went with them with a hammer, and the guy said, get him out of here. He can't eat here. If you're so hungry, go around to the back door like, well, he didn't say colored people, he said something else. And he said, go back there and they'll give you a bag with a hamburger. They'll sell you a bag with a hamburger. Well, Larry wasn't going to do that. He gets back and he's on the bus and he was going to go without eating all spring training. Joe Gordon comes in with that greasy sack with the hamburger and some French fries and some kind of a soft drink. And he says, get that stuff out of here. He said, I appreciate you. I'll pay you back for it. I will never spend one dime in this joint as long as I'm breathing. And make up your mind that's the way I'm going to be, because it's going to be that way all spring training. And that's the way it was. But Joe Gordon was so close with him, so close. An interesting story, and it stayed that way. Larry died first, and Joe got in the Hall of Fame after Larry died. And Joe's sister called me to ask me, did I know her brother, and could I tell her some things about him? Yeah, I knew him. I could tell him, first of all, the guy had a heart of gold and he never saw color. But and he did get in. But now when Larry's going to get in, it's 2 days before. He tells me a story. We're sitting in the coffee shop at the hotel up there, and he says, I'm having trouble with my speech. I said, don't even look at me. Don't even look at me. You speak from the heart. You know what you want to say. You say what you want to say. Okay. He says, well, I'm going to tell you a story because I've been turning this over in my mind. I wouldn't use it up here, but I want to tell you because it's one of the stories about me I never told you. He said, when we used to go by train, that's when Monty and I really had fun, because I used to have to travel all alone. Even at the start of the second season, there were no blacks in the league but me, and no blacks on my team but me. They signed Satchel in July. Okay. So, but he and Monty, two other blacks on the team, um, they they now he had someone to go out and eat with. Now he had someone he could play cards with. Now it was okay for him. So the train used to go all the way to, I think it was in the bottom of Georgia, just bordering with Florida. Uh, and they played three exhibition games there with the Indians. Then the train broke in half. Half went to Cleveland, half went to New York. So they're playing the first exhibition game, and they're throwing beer cans full of beer at Larry's head. He's in center field. And he's been in the league for a year. I mean, they know he's there, and he was the target for. Well, Larry says, I'm not. He walks inside. He walks across the field, and the manager says, "Where are you going?" He said, I'm going wherever I'm going. It ain't going to be out there. You want to play center field here? Go. Maybe they won't throw anything at you, but if I tell them you sign, you're my manager, maybe they will. He goes inside, takes a shower, comes out. The game's still going on. There's a tall, good-looking guy. He's got a Phi Beta Kappa key. He's got a three-piece suit. And he says, Mr. Doby, can I speak to you? He says, well, you're not going to throw anything to me. You can speak to me the rest of this game. He said, well, I'm the only black doctor in this town. And my wife and I think it's horrible. You have to go to a black boarding house. We want you to stay with us. She's a great cook. She'll make anything you want. Stay, because this is going to go on. As long as you guys are riding the trains, you'll be back here every year. Stay with us. And Larry told me they made me family. They really took me in. Now they're flying. They're not, the series is over. They don't go by train. They're flying. And it's several years later. Might be, well, probably if you know what happened, probably about 8 years, 7 years later. A doctor gets shot to death at a lunch counter in that town, and it's Larry's friend. And I said, you got to tell that story when you tell your speech tomorrow. He said, no, it's not the place for it. I said, Larry, you owe that guy. He said, I could never repay what I owe him. He said, but I got something else in the back of my mind that I'm going to say. I said, well, it's up to you. So now, and then we took the trip to the Hall of Fame the next night. Now it's the day of the induction. Now Jackie was inducted on the lawn of the museum because in those days it wasn't that big. Not that much. People didn't come from everywhere, you know. But now they got that big park, that huge park, and they got a ballpark there, but it's not. The park is bigger than that, and that's where everybody is out in the sun. I have two pictures in my book. Well, I have a lot of pictures, but two pictures. They're in the same page, I believe. One page, Larry is at, I'm going to talk about three pictures. He's at the podium and he's speaking. The next picture, he's sitting down, and I know Larry well enough to know what's happening. He's got a handkerchief wiping tears out of his eyes because that speech was so important to him, so important. And the third picture in that group is his wife, half out of a seat applauding him, and Newcomb has got his hands on her shoulders, keeping her in her seat. It was a family day up there. Of course, the family from down south came. The first 13 years of his life were in South Carolina, and the family from New Jersey, and it was a beautiful affair for them. So Larry gets up and he says, there's a lot of people who look at baseball and say, we haven't done enough on integration. He said, now, we got black players. We don't have a black manager yet. He said, but we are making progress. I dare you, he said to the audience, take baseball's contribution and take the rest of America's contribution. I maintain baseball made a bigger contribution. And he tells the story of the world famous picture. And I think you guys, I'm sure all of you have seen it. In this picture, Steve Gromek, who was the fourth guy in the rotation, didn't expect to pitch in a World Series. He pitched that day that Larry hit the home run. And he went the distance. And he's ecstatic. The dressing room was ecstatic. They haven't been, it's like 19, 20 years, they haven't been in a World Series. And he yells, hey, Dobes, come on, come over here. They got their arms around each other. And the photographer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer snaps the picture. And they're hugging, the smiles are just priceless. And at one point, in a series of these pictures, they get so close, you think they're going to kiss. Larry brings up that picture. Now, when Larry went home, and he told me many times, that picture sustained him for a number of years until he felt he was being treated fairly by people who had problems with him being there. He carried it with him. The picture, Steve Gromek, actually was the one guy who suffered from the picture. There was a guy, he was from Hamtramck, Michigan. The guy, there was a bar owned by a guy in Hamtramck who he played Little League with, he played high school with, he played Legion ball in the summer with. They were that close. He walks into the bar the first day he's home. The guy walks right past him. He says to one of the regulars, what's going on? He said, it's the picture. It's the picture. He says, I'll take care of that. He walks over, Gromek walks over and faces the guy and says, you got a problem with that picture? You got a problem? Because if you got a problem, to me, it's a blessing. He walked out of the bar. Hamtramck's a small town. They never spoke again. He's the guy that got the sting. He got the heat. But Larry comes home now. Larry's hit a home run to win the World Series for Gromek. It's wonderful. They put him in a convertible. They put the East Side High School marching band in front of him. They're going to observe Larry Doby Day on the playing field at East Side High School. I've spoken to so many people from Patterson who were in the street that day cheering the parade. Amazing. One of them was Joe Taub, who later founded ADP. Anyway, they get to the place goes wild. It's wonderful. 2 days later, his wife tells him she's pregnant. And now they got to move because they're in a little cramped place. 2 days after they honored him, he could not buy the home they picked out in Patterson, New Jersey. The real estate deal was don't sell to blacks in this area, in a particular area, very little. For him to get a house that she would accept, that was a decent house, which they moved into. The mayor of Patterson had to intercede with the real estate brokers. They wouldn't put him in the neighborhood she wanted, but they put him there. They did it twice to him. The second time he said, I'm leaving this town, and he went to Montclair. Now, the interesting thing about Larry is friendship with Larry means something. It lasted all those years with Monty Irvin. It lasted all those years with me. And it just meant so much. Joe Taub and he grew up on the same block when he came up to live in Patterson. And as Larry explained to me, this was an interesting neighborhood. The neighborhood was, today it's Latino. The neighborhood was predominantly Jewish, and the non-Jews were made up with blacks. So as Taub said to me, nobody cared whether you were white or black. That wasn't what we were interested in. We wanted to know which team you played on in the summer, which block you played against another block. That's what counted with us, nothing else. And Larry said, listen, when I lived here, if you had a problem with blacks, you were living somewhere else because we had no problems up here at all. None. Well, I talked to the two of them and I said, look, you're a Hall of Famer, and he founded ADP, and he bought the New Jersey Nets basketball team. You're both screaming successes. Do me a favor. Let's go back to the old neighborhood, take a walk with me, and point to different buildings and what happened in those buildings that influenced your lives. Well, it was drizzling, but the sun could have been 100. They didn't feel the rain. They were home. They were home. And as what's his name? Taub said, I come back here once a month to remind me where I started. And Doby said, interrupted right away, he said, if you don't know where you started, you don't know where you are and how you got there. So they're walking through here, total Latino neighborhood. Nobody's on the street because it's raining. And Taub points to a candy store. And he said, Larry, you don't know this story. I'm going to tell it to you now. I made a nice living playing gin rummy with a guy who hated you in the back of this department store because I had a trick. The discard pile was getting pretty big, and I'd say, hey, did you see Doby got 3 hits in Cleveland? Well, he didn't. I didn't even know what you did. But the guy said, Doby, don't give me Doby. I was a better player than him at Eastside High School. He couldn't carry my gym bag. And while he's saying this and articulating and waving his hand, Doby's going through the discard. Taub is going through the discard pile to see the card he needs. He says, are you done? Gin. He cheated him every game. and he said, I never thanked you for that. They walked along and they pointed to the places where they picked up hot dogs, where they stood in front of the building, school number 6, which is not a credit to the Patterson school system because it's still standing. And that's where they went to school, and they stood in front of it. Anyway, the only sound, and it didn't distract them, it's dead silence. The 3 of us are the only people on the street. And suddenly I hear a woman screaming at her kid. She said, get in the freaking car right now. They didn't even turn their heads. Didn't mean to think that they were in another world. And that friendship was a beautiful friendship. Doby later, when he quit baseball, first time he quit, was when he didn't get the Cleveland managing job. And then he went back, and you know what happened. But the first time he quit, he went to work for Taub at ADP. Taub, not an ADP, Taub put him with the New Jersey Nets basketball team as a community affairs guy. And he made speeches, and everybody loved him because he related to everybody. Blue collar people were his people. Anyway, Taub wanted a little revenge on ADP. He sold most of it out, but he scheduled a softball game against the ADP softball team for the New Jersey Nets. He had a couple of athletes. And he said to Doby, you're playing in that game. And Doby said, I'm not playing in that game. I haven't held the bat on my hip. I'm not going to play. You're going to play. Don't give me any problems, Doby. You're going to play. I got to win this game. Tom was as competitive as Doby. They're playing in a little town, Nutley. They're playing in a park. Doby gets up and he says, I'm not going to play. But for everybody here, I want to give you a little lesson in how to bat. He gets up, he hits 5 balls over the left field wall. He hits 5 balls over the right field wall. And then he hits 5 balls over the center field wall, and everybody in the place gives him a standing ovation. But he didn't want to play in that game. He thought he'd be taken advantage if he did. I wrote this book because he told me stories he never told anybody. I was the first one he told a story to about the guy who attacked his wife. They're in St. Louis, Jim Crow Town, and standing in the first row of the grandstand over the batting circle is a guy with a little megaphone. And he's going, nigger, nigger, nigger. And Doby said, that didn't bother me. I heard that enough times long before I got to St. Louis. But then the guy said, he's uppity, but you think he's uppity. You should have seen what his wife, Helen, she spells her name Helyn. She's uppity, what she did for me in my hotel room last night. That's all he has to hear. He didn't need the bat. He's on his way into the stands. He's got one leg over the railing. Suddenly he's flying backwards through the air, and on top of him is the pitching and bench coach. And the guy says, Dobes, don't make a move. You go in the stands, you'll never play another baseball game. But I'm telling you something about the American League. You're not in the National League. They got about 10 blacks now. It's you. And Satchel had been saying, it's you. They don't like you. They don't like the color of your skin. They hate everybody. If you go in the stands again, when you've got a different responsibility, we will get another black player for 10 years. And Doby just stayed where he was. And when Doby told me the story, the guy's a Hall of Fame manager. He was a bench coach then. And Doby told me a story. He said, you know, that was the first time he saved my career. I said, what was the second? We're leaving town. The season is over. We're packing up our stuff. He comes to me and he says, come out in the hall. I want to talk to you. He said, you didn't make this team yet. You hit 157. I know why you hit 157. I know what the manager did to you. But you gotta get, listen, we have a bunch of lousy outfielders. We're going to have to trade for some quality fielders. We're going to have to see what we got. We got nothing. You go home this summer, this winter, you learn to play the outfield. Then you go to Boudreau and say, give me a shot at the outfield. He's no fool. If you can wind up playing it, it helps his team. He'll let you. With that advice, Doby goes home. He hires 2 high school kids. He's chasing fungos in the snow on the high school field. And then he goes to the library and he says to the librarian, who doesn't know a baseball from an egg, have you got any books about the outfield, how to play the outfield? She said, you know, a book came in today. It's the right fielder for the Yankees. I think his name is Tommy Henricks. He said, that's him. He wrote a book on how I play the outfield. You can take it out. He checks. So he reads the book. He runs in the snow. That's all he knows about the outfield. When he goes to Boudreau, Boudreau says, take a shot. Go ahead. Because I can't get you in the infield. Joe Gordon's a second baseman. I'm a shortstop. I don't know what I do with you. Well, Beck had this in mind all along. I mean, once he saw how the season was going with the year before. So Beck gets there's a guy named Chris Speaker, one of the greatest center fielders of all time for the Boston Red Sox, and winds up playing center field for the Indians as a playing manager when he retires, and then he's selling wholesale liquor to the bars around town. Beck brings him back as a goodwill ambassador, but when he comes back for the second year, he says, don't make another speech for me. You're going to see that kid over there, now he's 24. You're going to teach him how to play center field or wherever you can put him. But you're going to teach him how to play the outfield. And that's your job. Well, Larry learned something, and I learned something that at the time Speaker did not know. Speaker was from Texas. And in his youth, before he got to the Red Sox, he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And now he's assigned to be that close to do all but sleep with Larry. But a funny thing happened on Larry's way to stardom. If they had both been from the same place, it never would have happened. Their upbringing was so different between the Klan and Larry in the Deep South early that they were questioning each other all the time about, well, you know, they'd take a break in training, they'd say, Yeah, we had a field there, and it was short left field, that kind of stuff. But they got to know each other so much so they became great friends. And Speaker did it. He made this guy into a different. He had a course at Outfield 101 that year. And that year, uh, 3 years later, the year that Willie made the catch, and I'll tell you, I just had come back from Korea. Uh, that little disturbance over there that the government paid my expense to get to. And it was my birthday. I was now working at the Ledger again, but I wasn't working that day. My cousin, who knew about my father's fanaticism for the Giants and my interest, bought two seats, one for him, one for me, I think it was right center field, looking straight at the catch. I saw that Willie Mays catch like most people in the park never saw it. But I was told by a guy named Dizzy Dean, who was doing the game of the week, that Larry Doby made a better catch in Cleveland Municipal Stadium. He leaned over into the stands. There were two potential winning runs on base. Made the catch, fell forward, and it was right behind the bullpen, and he fell right through the awning that covered the Indians bullpen, hit the ground, and stood up holding the ball. The next day, Dizzy Dean, who had called the game for game of the week, said, he said, I don't know much about this Doby, but I'll tell you, but I know nothing about the guy who was pitching. But that pitcher owes Larry Doby a month's salary for that catch. He said, I've been around a while. I never saw a catch that good, and that was Dizzy Dean. So that's how they went. How are we doing on time?
I think we're ready for questions soon,
I
if you'd
thought you
like.
were. I was going too far. One thing I do want to say, one quick thing. It happened in the polo grounds and offices. The Giants were 6 games out of first place, 1950. You'll recall Dick Sisler hit the home run in the playoff for the Dodgers, and the Phillies whiz kids went to the World Series. But in July, they were only 6 games back. And Hank Thompson went to Monte Irvin because he knew everybody loved Monte. He said, Monte, they put me at third base. I'm in a terrible batting slump. I could play third, but I'm not really a third baseman. Go talk to DeRocher. Ask Leo, will he put me back in the outfield? I'll start hitting again. I'm in a terrible slump. Irvin, having heard what he said, I'm not really a third baseman. His mind his mind was like that. The two of them looked at each other. He said, we know where to find a third baseman. And they both said, Ray Dandridge. Ray Dandridge is in Minneapolis at the top Giant club. He's hitting close to 400. He's going to win Rookie of the Year and Golden Glove Award. And they bring him up now. They got a shot because they're only 6 back. They go tell Leo Lewis, don't go any further. You're talking about the guy in Minneapolis. Right? He said, I know his name, Ray Dandridge. I want that guy. I've tried 4 times. The Giants will not bring him up. Now you go to Chub Feeney, who is the general manager, and what's his name? Stoneham. Horace really likes him, and he's a nephew, I think. I don't know that I'm not sure. Tell him that, and you have my permission to say Leo wants him. So they go to him, they tell him the story, and we know where there's a third baseman. And he said, he's black. He said, well, I don't know of any black third baseman in the major leagues. And they said, there isn't one. Ray Dandridge is under contract to you in Minneapolis. And Chubb says to them, that's a great idea. And he looks at them and he says, and it's not his fault, it's the way it was. He says, which of you or the other guys is willing to go to the minors? And Doby said to me, that's how I learned every team had a black quota at that time. Okay, I'll answer any questions. And if I can't answer, I'll tell you it's none of your business.
Jerry, first of all, 94 years old. I don't know. You have lost nothing on your fastball.
Hey, I spoke to a guy yesterday who's 99. His name is Marv Levy. You know who he is?
Yes, I
I got
do.
a I got a column on him Sunday.
Good. Um, but I mean, you're talking about stuff 70 years ago like it was yesterday. So what is the best way to get your book? Amazon?
Amazon. You can go to Barnes and Noble if you have some kind of deal. Amazon is better, and you'll probably get it within 2 or 3 days.
Just great stories. I got one, you still got a while to go if you know what I mean.
I hope.
You spoke about your three best friends, Muhammad Ali, Larry Doby, Monty Irvin. I see the Doby book. I know you've written a lot about Ali and other people's books. Any thought about writing one on Monty Irvin?
Oh yeah, Monty Irvin made me write that book. This book, Doby book. I had started once on it, and I'm slow sometimes, and I got my day job was tying me up a lot at the time. So I told Monty I was going to write the book, and nothing happened. Monty, I was tired. Look, I love the Newark that I grew up in. I'm not saying this is the same, but I'm saying also it's not the way it's portrayed. I got tired of it because the only time I ever read a story about Newark was somebody was murdered, a car was stolen. So I said, I'm going to do something. We had a ballpark then with very short-sighted people screwed up, tore down, and we don't have a team anymore. But I did some research. There were these were the major pro teams in Newark. The Newark Bears, who were voted in 2001 the greatest minor league franchise in history, they were a Yankee farm team. They were the first team I saw play baseball at 7. There were the Newark Peppers of the league that remember they lasted about 3 weeks. The players started their own league when they had a strike, and they were pretty good. Then there was the Newark Eagles, who won the Black World Series in 1946, and Monty and Larry both played on that team. And then there was a team called the the Newark Dodgers, and there was another one. There was the Newark Indians. The Newark Indians were managed by the guy that pitched 2 games in the doubleheader, the Iron Man McGinley or something like that. Yeah, and found out that we had in all those teams 14 guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame, 14 guys who played in Newark. Well, I said, I'm going to do something. I want to put up plaques in this ballpark, which thank God, I don't know what happened to it. And they put them up behind home plate. We invited back the black ball players we could find. We invited, Yogi was there. It was a great crowd. I was the MC. They had to put up with that. So anyway, I go through, and there's another one. They put up they're covered. They're all behind home plate, upper deck, and they're covered with sheets. You don't know what's coming out next when I introduce what it is. There's an extra sheet, a 15th sheet. They double crossed me. They put up my Hall of Fame. I mean, 18 Halls of Fame. They put that up, and when they took it off, my comment was, "There goes the neighborhood." But these guys were fabulous, most of them. And afterward, Monty was in a wheelchair then, having trouble. Afterwards, I went over, we hugged, and he said, "Listen, brother, I got to tell you something. You can't die." I said, "Well, have you become omnipotent lately? I mean, I know you're a pretty good ball player, but don't anoint yourself." He said, "That's not what it is. You're the last national writer who saw us play when we were in the black leagues. And every year you write at least one piece about that. So now when smart ass kids can say they would never give you a league, you're the proof. So you gotta, and you talked about that, you gotta do the Doby book." And I said, "Well, I promise you," it became a deathbed promise. "I promise you I will do it, but I can't give it to you by Thursday. I got a dentist appointment." So now, years later, he's in assisted living, and he's living in Houston, Texas. and he's pretty
Hi.
weak, pretty weak. So now he puts a, let me get this right. He puts a note on his desk because his daughter Pamela used to come every morning to check on him. And he knew he was very weak. The note said, if I should pass away last night, make sure you call Jerry and tell him I'm gone. You know damn well I had to finish the Doby book then.
Thank you, Jerry. Mars, and then Donna and Frank. Mars,
Jerry, your stories are great. They remind me of what my pop used to tell me when he worked as a vendor in the Polo Grounds in 1933, and he
Yeah,
was ball
yeah,
boy for
yeah,
a day.
yeah.
So I heard all the stories about Carl Hubble, Bill Terry, Mel Ott, the Big Four, which were Hal Schumacher and Hubble and Fitzsimmons and Leroy Parmalee. They scored very few runs, and they were
That's why they won. The
yeah,
guys,
but they
when
had
they
great
got older,
pitching.
they lost. When they got older, they lost.
Well, like all of them, just like we've
Yeah,
seen it happen before. A footnote, when you mentioned Paterson, New Jersey,
yeah.
one of my favorite characters is the native son, Lou Costello.
Oh,
My
Lou
father knew
Costello,
my
yeah.
father knew him, and he took me to see Lou Costello at the Proctor's Theater. We had vaudeville then, in Newark, and he was. An interesting thing is they did that. Who's on first routine? They filmed it about 20 times with different backgrounds. One of the backgrounds is the scoreboard. On the scoreboard is the Patterson Silk Sox, a semi-pro team that my father tried out for at one point before he turned pro.
Well, I wanted to mention that a couple of comments and then a couple of questions.
Yeah,
The relationship with blacks and Jews, like Joe Gordon, but then there was somebody that was half Mexican, half white,
yeah, yeah.
Ted Williams, that was a great backer of black ball players. He wasn't a big favorite with the Boston fans, but he certainly like made great comments about black ball players like Willie Mays. And
He talked about them at his induction. At his
r-
induction in the Hall of Fame, he talked about the black ball players.
yes, yes, that's right. So one of the questions I have two questions here. Certainly, I definitely agree with you about dropping out of voting for the Hall of Fame because the criteria is so different. Like with starting pitchers, like there there is no criteria anymore for honoring them because there's no 300 game winners unless Verlander happens to make it. But I think Kate Upton has greater assets than he does. And so what they're voting on now is completely different to me than true Hall of Fame candidates. And so one of the questions I want you to elaborate on that one. And the question I have, which was mentioned in our like pregame show, if you will, which is about Audie Wilson, because he would have been the fifth black.
Yes.
And I think it was Horace Stoneham that said, well, we'd have to get a sixth black ball player to be his roommate. Can you elaborate on that one first? Because you
Well,
mentioned it
I
earlier.
personally, I don't think Horace Stoneham said it for one reason. I don't think he was groping for an excuse. They already had a quota. You know, as far as Hardy Wilson went, he could have made it. Um, but there was a kind of well, Irvin and several guys. And I don't think he was at home there. He was the kind of guy who he was not a party guy, you know. And there was a story about when they had a party and somebody said, you can't stay and go to sleep. Come to the party, come to the party. And then, so he went. Then he left with everybody else. Then Doby was appointed to collect money for the party. And he said, I didn't want to go to the party. I was talked into going. I'm not going to pay for something I didn't want to go to. And Doby had a little hair trigger, temper. They were given a car, all the players, so they could all drive to spring training. I mean all the players. They went on a team bus, but I mean the black players. And he took the car, just took the car and went away. Doby was mad, drove around for a couple of hours, but they were not friends. Doby never told me that story. Somebody else told me that story who was there. I think Artie had a wonderful career. I mean, wherever he went, he hit. I think if Artie had been a power hitter, he might have had a better chance. But you got to remember, they were living with a quota. Who were they gonna send out? And he had not yet made the team. And he certainly was good enough to make it.
Well, tell me about your how the Hall of Fame criteria has changed and why you won't vote anymore.
Well, no, it isn't the Hall of Fame. It's baseball. It's baseball's attitude. First of all, I have been after. They finally did something with the boxing writers. That's an international group also, Canastota, New York. You vote for the era that you were active in. That's something the Hall of Fame should do. These guys, well, the Veterans Committee, maybe that's different. But these guys writers were, some of them, everybody who's on a website's got a baseball writer's card. Let me tell you, it was hard. It was, you took it seriously. When I have a baseball writer's card, I won't hold it up. Because I retired, they took away my number. The number is, when you join, that's the number of writers, you're the last one, and you go on. When I retired, I lied a couple of times, but when I finally did retire, which I haven't done because I'm still writing, but I retired from active. I can't get on a plane. That disqualifies me in my mind. I don't get enough places anymore. But when I retired, my number was 3. Of all the baseball writers in America, I was number 3. And it meant something to me. In those days, if you could get into the low digits, you had seen everybody. These guys, they see people on television. If they're not beat writers, they're not all beat writers. Everybody's a commentator now. Everybody's got the wisdom of Solomon. That's Solomon Schwartz, not King Solomon, because they don't have any wisdom. Don't have any wisdom at all. They're voting on what they see on television or what they hear or it's not a legitimate constituency. What it was when I started, it was beat writers or guys who were not necessarily full-time beat writers, but they were the relief guy for the guy who was the beat writer. It was that, and it was columnists, which I've always been. Other than that, today, anybody who's got a website in his basement in the dark can vote. Now the fans can vote. I never wanted the fans to vote. I remember when the fans started voting, they voted by cities. In other words, they had a guy who was up for the Hall of Fame. He's the guy they voted for. It didn't mean anything. I think it's been cheapened look, I think baseball has been cheapened. I'll give you another thing which is related to my view of baseball, but not to what you asked. I think they've done a horrible job destroying the towns that lived and died with minor league clubs. A minor league team means more percentage-wise to the population than a major league team. I remember when the Newark Bears were the Yankees AAA team, and I'm really talking now about AA and single A, but when they were AAA, they'd come home from Sebring, Florida, spring training. They put them in convertibles, drive them through town, 2 high school bands in front of them, going to the ballpark, people lining the street. At the ballpark, 3,000 came to watch them work out. But what were they seeing? People throwing and catching. That was the whole thing. The next day, they played the Yankees, because the Yankees were their bosses. And the Yankees always took a sore-arm pitcher who was headed for Valdosta and let him pitch so that the Bears would always win that game. When they took the Bears out of Newark, they cut the heart out of Newark. I was a kid working downtown, wrapping packages in a department store. I was about 15 years old. I would take the bus home, get off at the bus stop. I'd have to walk 4 blocks to my house. No air conditioning, windows all open. I never missed a single pitch of a Newark Bears game while I was walking. That's how much the town was involved. Then they couldn't support when they just, it was terrible. And I see small town. Look, I decided North Carolina was where I wanted to write early season columns from, because they had every form of baseball, class D, half league, you know, there isn't any B or C anymore. A, double A, triple A, everything but Major League Baseball. And I get to Kinston, North Carolina, single A Carolina League. I pull onto the main street. There's an oilcloth. I haven't seen oilcloth in years. An oilcloth banner across Main Street, which is called Main Street. It says, "God bless our tobacco farmers and our Kinston Indians." That's how much that team meant to. I went to that game that night. The pub PA system was a school teacher, female, and she'd say, "Oh, Charlie Smith is back with us. You know, Charlie never missed a game in 7 years. He had appendicitis. Let's all give Charlie a hand." That's how they participated. They took away the teams.
Terrible.
They took away the meaning of the teams. And those towns need that team. Baseball, I'm sorry. When I hear baseball, a Chevrolet and apple pie, I laugh. I like apple
Thank you,
pie,
Jerry.
and my first car was a Chevy, but baseball, I don't know anymore.
Donna, you are up. Donna.
Mr. Eisenberg, I want to give you, first of all, thank you very much.
My name is Jerry.
Okay,
Let's get
Jerry.
that done. All right.
Thank you very much for being here. I wanted to give you the opportunity to put a face to a name because we've spoken a couple of times recently. I'm the president of the Elysian Fields chapter of SABR.
Oh, the woman with you got smart sense. Yeah.
So hi.
You have what my father would have called cejo. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I hope that I can read this in a book someday, but I wonder if you would share a story with us, if you had any conversations with Monte Irvin about the fact that, or maybe I shouldn't say fact, the legend that he was supposed to be the person to break.
It's true.
It is true. Okay. So did you talk to him about that a bit?
I will. You be quiet, I'll talk. Okay. Monte was signed to a contract to play for the Brown Dodgers, which never going to exist. He was the first one. And the contract was, the small print said, of course, the Dodgers can transfer that contract. Right. He was the guy. He comes home and he really was the guy. I saw Monte play with the Newark Eagles when he could throw home from center field in Newark was 410 feet. And he could throw home on the bounce to try to catch a base runner. I mean, he was amazing. The Army took a lot out of him. Now he's signed, and he calls up Ricky because Monte was, I've known a lot of honorable people. Some of them don't like to associate with me. So, but Monte is at least as honorable as anybody I ever knew. He calls Branch Rickey, and he says, "Mr. Rickey," he said, "I got to tell you, I got a little physical problem now. It happened in a service when I came out. I have double vision. It might have been Meniere's disease because that's what I used to have." He said, "I had double vision. I'm getting a medication. I will be okay within 10 or 15 days, so I can't report before that, but I'd love to play for you." And Ricky, in his usual style, said, "Oh, Monte, you will always have a job with the Dodgers." And he called up Horace Stoneham. He said, "We could have a great rivalry. Why don't you sign this kid that's going back to the Eagles?" And he said, I happen to know, because that's what Effa Manley wanted for him and didn't get. I happen to know you can sign up for $15,000. Call Mrs. Manley, you can make the deal. They did make that deal, but other people had influence in making the deal. He just wanted to he didn't want Irvin to come back to him and say, well, where am I now? My eyes are fine, you know. It's a true story. He was first signed. And as a matter of fact, he got the wrong, you never want to get a woman angry about something that's really dear to her. And Monte was like a son to her, the way she treated him. She treated other ball players, not like they were in the family, but she was very close with other ball players. But Monte was like a son. And so when she found out that Ricky had signed Monte, she called him up and she said, I don't know what kind of lawyers you have, Mr. Ricky, but you better get the best you can get, because the Supreme Court's not going to bail you out of this one. He's under contract to me. And when that happened, until then he hadn't touched the contract. He tore up the contract. He did something. This is show you the kind of guy Ricky was, really. He invited all of the black newspapers in the metropolitan area, the Amsterdam News, Afro-American, all those papers, to come, them alone, to come to a press conference. And he addressed the press conference. And he said, I'm so happy that you guys are now, you'll be in there, but speaking. And I want to tell you, there's a woman, a black woman, I must say, he said colored at that time, standing in the way of your race. Her name is Effa Manley. She was Abe was the scout, and Effa was the businesswoman for the franchise. And she's preventing more blacks from her team and going. And these guys were so thrilled to have luncheon on the Arm, they wrote a column about it. Now, it didn't hurt her any, because she went out of business 3 years later anyway. But it's just interesting, because he was the first. And also, I've asked, I knew a lot of guys, not so many, I knew a couple in the American League, but the Negro National League, I knew a lot of guys because the Eagles were in that league. And they all told me that they thought it would be him, because they knew that they all thought it was going to be Josh Gibson, but they knew it wasn't going to be, because Josh Gibson, nobody knew what it was. He had a brain tumor, but nobody knew what it was. He couldn't get along with anybody, you know. That's because of what was happening to his mind. So they figured it wouldn't be him. They never thought about Robinson, although there were two. A story was told to me by the guy who was baseball's ambassador, the black guy, I'm sorry about names, the black guy, first baseman, great player. 1 second. Kansas City Monarchs. He's in the Hall of Fame now.
Buck O'Neill.
You got it. There's no prize, but you got it. I will say that name over again.
Buck Leonard.
30 times in my time, so that I never forget it again. But anyway, he told me a story about two members of the Monarchs went over, I think it was Pop Gaines, but it was a 50-year-old black player who had a reputation as being the fastest runner when he was younger in the Negro leagues, in any league. He's the guy who phonied up the desk lamp in the hotel room and bet his roommate. He turned it off, but he could be in bed before it went out. He was so fast. He messed with the circuitry. Anyway, they came to him and they said, listen, you know, we think Jackie may become the first. And he could have said Jackie who, because Jackie was not that, he was not an important player in the Negro American League. He started the 6 months he was with him because the regular shortstop broke his ankle. But anyway, they said, we think it's going to be him, and we don't want it to be him for one reason only. He's a hell of a player. We have nothing against, but as a shortstop, he has trouble going in the hole. and he has trouble dealing with different kinds of slides when you're stealing a base. She said, well, why are you telling me that? They don't want me. I'm an old man. We would like you to test them. He said, I can hit the ball where I want. I'll do that. So he sent him in a hole 3 times and beat him out all 3 times. And he stole second off. The first time he stole second was a hook slide. The second time was belly first. The third time was a fadeaway. He's wiping dirt off his trousers. And he says, come here to Robinson. Young fella, I got to tell you something. You had a little trouble with my slides. You better work and learn, because where you're going, everybody can make all those slides. So they had some feeling, and you might not have been Irvin. They probably were talking about the big power hitter, but and Jackie proved them wrong, because it didn't take him long to learn. What he had to do was find a position, and they found it for him. But yeah, getting back to your question, Irvin was the best. And there's nobody to talk to anymore. They're all gone. But I was in touch with a lot of those guys. I helped them organize the first black baseball union in Atlantic City. It's still going on now, but there are very few guys left. Many of them, I would say many of them thought it should have been Monte.
Thank you, Donna. We're
Thank
going to
you.
wrap it up with Frank Sexton. Frank, do you still have a question?
Yeah, it's really just in the way of a thank you. Jerry, back when I was just starting out in the practice of law in Manhattan in the early 70s, I'd get on the 805 every night at a Grand Central, heading back to White Plains to try and reclaim my humanity after a day of fighting in the trenches. And I'd buy my New York Post, and the first thing I would turn to would be Jerry Izenberg's column there. And I must have read hundreds of them in those 10 years. And it would sort of bring me back to some humanity there. And I just wanted to thank you, sir, for all of the hundreds of articles and hours of pleasure you gave me in reading what you wrote.
Well, I unequivocally, listen, when anybody thanks me, I thank you for thanking me. And I thank you more for reading me. I tried, I'm sort of an anachronism. I'm out of shape and out of favor. And my style of writing was honed by a number of really people who could help me. I was of the nationally known or nationally recognized columnists. I was the youngest when I got the column. And I had a traveling faculty. I mean, I traveled with Dick Young, the greatest baseball writer who ever lived. Not much of a columnist, but the greatest writer. Frank Graham, who taught me the art of standing around the batting cage and just listening to them talk. You could always get a column out of that. Red Smith.
Red Smith, yeah.
But I worked in the Herald Tribune for 3 years. I sat next to Red Smith. And everybody says, well, he taught you. Well, he taught me something that they don't know. He was not the guy that I really tried in the beginning to emulate. What he was the guy who gave all of us permission to write the English language as it's known. No more. In the 5th canto, we got a double, and it was, it was just everything but the language they used, and I never did. And the guy who taught me the most was a man named Stanley Woodward, my editor of 2 papers, the greatest sports editor ever lived. He taught me how to write. He taught me when to write, and he taught me when not to write. And those are 3 arts. He told
Well,
me
you brought people a lot of pleasure, sir.
Well, I appreciate it. He taught me 2 things. If you want to be a columnist, you got to learn how to listen, and you got to learn how to see. And that's why I take a lot of subjects that other people aren't interested in. I thank you for that very much.
All right, let's all give it up for Jerry Izenberg. Jerry, I know you're going to joke around with me, but you are a national treasure. I know you're going to say you're going to be buried. We don't want to hear that stuff.
No, I'm a national treasure in my own mind.
No,
not
in
in
our
my own
mind too.
time.
And again, great book, Larry Doby. Jerry, please don't be a stranger.
I won't.
And we're waiting for your Monte Irvin book next year, so you make sure you start working on
Well,
that.
as a matter of fact, I'm working on another book, but it's not a baseball book. But I'm working on my 16th book.
All right.
I want to do 20 if I can.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will reconvene next week on Thursday with Eric Ray. Have a great week, and I'm going to shut down the recording. And Jerry, again, amazing. We will see each other next week. Have a great week,
A
everybody.
pleasure to
Thank
be
you,
here.
That was
Gary.
great, Jerry. Thanks.
Thank
Great guy.
you so much.
You're all welcome.
Thank you.